Welcome back. In our last video, you learned about variables and basic operation. In this video, we're going to dive deeper into two of the most important data types you'll use in Python: strings and numbers. We'll show you how they work, how to use them in your programs, and why understanding the difference between them is so important. Let's dive in. What is a string? A string is a sequence of characters, which could be letters, numbers, symbols, or spaces, or really anything you can type on a keyboard, all wrapped in quotes. Let's see this code example. We have a variable called message, and this has a string of hello world. We can print this out and we can get message out. Now, in previous lessons, I've used the name of text, but really the proper naming convention for this is going to be a string. Strings are always inside of quotes. You can do either double quotes like I did here, or you can even do single quotes. Both of these give you the exact same output. When working with strings, we can do something called concatenation, which is just really a fancy word for combining strings. And we've seen this already in previous lessons. We have a variable called first name, and we can pass in the value of Alex. We have another variable called last name, pass in the value of Smith, and we can create a full name variable where we're going to join together first name and last name. First name plus, we can join an empty string here for formatting, and we can join last name. Finally, we can print out full name, and we see here that we get Alex Smith. We saw this in previous lessons, and the proper name for this is string concatenation. We take two different variables, each with their own string, and we join them together to form a brand new variable with the values of both of those and an empty space. Finally, we print them out and we get full name. Now, another way that we can build a string is by using repetition. Now, this isn't common, but it is something that you may see, so it's important to cover. We can create a variable called laugh and pass in the string of ha. We'll add a space for formatting, and we can multiply this by 3. And when we print laugh, we see here ha ha ha, a formatted string of ha times 3. Once again, not common, but it is a way of doing some stuff. Now, we talked about string concatenation. Let's talk about a much more stronger and powerful way of formatted strings, and really a much more common way of doing things, and that's going to be using F strings. F strings are used in a method called string interpolation. String interpolation is just a way to insert variables into a string without having to join them together at every individual section. We do that by using the F keyword. Let's see a real example here. We can create a variable called name, and we're going to pass in the value of Alex. We'll create a different variable with the value of 30, which, as we know, is an integer. So we have two different data types here. Earlier we saw that we got some weird functionality when trying to join an integer into a string. It didn't like that. Well, with formatted strings or string interpolation, we can get around that. We can use the print statement, and within here, before we start our string, we're going to call the F keyword. This F keyword here is going to let Python know that everything that follows should be a formatted string. So although it's supposed to be a string, it should be aware that there might be some variables passed in within here, so it should know how to handle it. So we're going to open up our string here. We're using double quotation marks. And we can start by saying my name is. And where we would naturally join the variable of name, we can just pass it directly in here using curly braces. These curly braces will take in our variable, which will be name. We continue on saying, and I am. We'll pass in another variable, which will be age. And finish this off by saying years old. Here, the F keyword knows that there might be variables within here. So when our string runs, it says my name is. It gets to the curly braces. Python identifies this as some form of code, possibly a variable. It reads the variable of name. It uses that variable name to find its value within our memory. It returns to us the value of Alex and joins it together within our string. And it does the exact same thing for age, even though it's an integer. We put the F before the quotes and we use curly braces to plug in our variables. A real world example would be using a website where at the top you might want to have a customized message of welcome Alex. This comes from a string built using code just like this. Working with numbers. Next, let's go ahead and introduce our two main numeric types. The first one will be integers, which are our whole numbers, like integers like 5, 42, or even something like -7. We have floats, and floats are going to be our decimal point numbers. These could be something like 3.14, which is pi, or a negative decimal point like 0.5. These are two different data types. Integers are our whole numbers, and floats will be our decimal point numbers. Now let's see them in action. First, we'll cover whole numbers. We can create two different variables. We'll say x is equal to 10, and we can say y is equal to 3. We can go ahead and print out the result of x plus y. In Python, we can create integers and use these integers to do basic math. Here we added the 10 and the 3 together, and it gave us 13. Just like we can add, we can also subtract. We replace the plus operator with the minus operator, and we run this, and now we get 7. We can multiply, as seen in previous lessons, by using the single asterisk. We run this, and we get 10 times 3 is 30. If we wanted to use exponents, we can use 2 asterisks, which would signify 10 to the power of 3, resulting in 1,000. Finally, if you desire to use division, division is represented by the /. This is going to divide 10 by 3 and result in 3.33 because 10 does not divide evenly with 3. A real-world example would be calculating the total cost in a shopping cart or figuring out someone's age from their birth year. These are all uses of numbers and simple math in code. User input and type conversion. The next thing I want to talk about is using the input method. We talked about it before, but let's see how it interacts with the different data types a little bit more in depth. As we know, Python always uses or gives you a string even if the user types a number. Here we have the variable of user input, which is going to use the input method, and we pass in a string of input or enter a number. Next, let's go ahead and print out user input plus user input. When we run this, if I pass in 5, we would assume that the print statement is going to add 5 plus 5 and give us 10. but it gives us 55. Right, going back to your previous lesson, as I mentioned to you guys before, the input method will always return to you a string, even if you pass in a number. And as we saw before, the functionality or the behavior between strings in Python, it tries to join them together, essentially string concatenation, to create a completely new string of 55. But that's not exactly what we would like. Ideally, when taking input, we should be able to do some math. So how do we do math? Well, because we know the input by default gives us a string, we need to convert this to an integer to allow us to use the previous arithmetic operations as we saw in this lesson. We saw a small introduction to this, but the way that we do this is by using typecasting. Right now, the type of data this is a string, and we need to cast it into a new type, which is going to be integer. And we do that by using methods like int, string, float, right? This allows us to convert between integers, strings, or floats. There might be some additional ones out there, but these are the most basic ones that you'll be working with. And we want to convert this string into an integer. So we're going to take the result of input and wrap it around this int function, which really is just a fancy word for a wrapper, an int wrapper. And what this is going to do, it will convert it to an integer. That way, it gives us the expected output that we wanted, which is the addition of user input plus user input. And when I run this, I see here that instead of 55, I'm now getting the expected output of 10. Now it is real math. Now let's try this with decimals. We can create a variable called price. We'll use the input method again and pass in the message of enter a price. As we mentioned before, we know this will be a string and we want to convert it to a float because values like prices are typically decimal point values. Next, let's go ahead and print out a formatted string where I have the price plus tax is, and I can pass in the price variable like we saw earlier when talking about formatted strings, but I can also do some form of arithmetic in here. I can do some basic code. I can multiply price by 1.1, which is going to give me the output and take the spot of this point here in the string. I run this, I can say 5.99, and I see here that the price plus tax is 6.589. Well, now why does this matter? Well, if you don't convert, Python will think you're trying to add two pieces of text and not two numbers until it will behave differently or even throw an error. Let's see what happens if I don't add float here and this is just a string. I can say 5.99. And as I see here, we can't multiply sequence by non-int of type float. Right? It doesn't behave well with floats. So you want to make sure that you add the float wrapper around it. And now we get back our expected output. Now, let's talk about mixing strings and numbers carefully. Really, we're just summarizing together the two different ways that we can do this. We have age is equal to 25. Let's go ahead and print out I am. And I'm going to join age together within here using string concatenation. Now, for this to work, they have to be the same data type. And I've already introduced you to typecasting. So what we can do here is when we pass in age, all we're going to do is wrap this around parentheses and pass in string to typecast this into a string in the middle of this string concatenation. And then we can continue like normal by passing in years old. We can also use the F string format and pass in age and say years old. When I run this, I get the exact same output for both of these. So Whichever method you decide to go with, really there's no difference here. Whatever you feel the most comfortable with, but chances are you're more likely to see the F format over using string concatenation because there's more steps to it. This is a little bit cleaner and nicer. If you desire more practice with this, you can check out the exercises within the module, or you can just mess around within the code editors. You can do something like ask the user for their name, their birth year, and even try to calculate and print out their age of what would it look like within 10 years or 100 years. Remember to use typecasting like int to strings or string to int or to floats. Great job today. You now understand how strings and numbers work in Python, how to use input, and why types matter when doing math or building output. In our next video, we're going to get some hands-on with calculations and really start putting these concepts into use in fun and simple programs. Keep practicing, keep experimenting, and I'll see you in the next lesson.